Good, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going out with a little walkie walk with the Pips. Today, I want to do, ooh, my camera holder's going all over the place. I'm going to do a little Q&A section. I have a lot of people that will watch my videos, especially on YouTube or Facebook or Instagram, whatever social media that you guys have. From time to time, I'll get different comments or questions at the end of each one of the videos. I want to do a little short series. I'll do this in 3 parts. Right now, it will be part 1 of a little Q&A section. I want to be able to answer some of y'all's questions. Let's get right into it, shall we? Oh my gosh, I look like a hot mess. Question number 1. Some people are approved for surgery, but not GLP-1s, or some people, they seem to be approved for surgery before they'll be approved for GLP-1. Why is that? That's a really good question. Quite honestly, I would like to say it's because the insurance companies are looking out for what is the best medical outcome. That is actually not in fact the case. It really is a more financial one. It really all comes down to your insurance coverage. Unfortunately, you as a patient, while insurance can be nice and convoluted and difficult to read and figure out, believe me, I've had to learn all that on my own. Whenever I went into practice on my own, it is not easy and there's no textbook for it. It really is your responsibility as a patient to kind of wade through the weeds and understand what your insurance plan will and will not cover. For instance, when my patients call my office for an appointment and we quote unquote verify your insurance, what we're doing, number 1, is we're looking to see, is your insurance plan still active? Number 2, we are only specifically asking for your bariatric benefits in terms of what your insurance plan will and will not cover for weight loss surgery. There's a whole nother decision tree and thought plan that your insurance goes through for medications. That's also the same for your mental health benefits as well. Ooh, look at this big old hound dog. Upset I'm walking Pippi right now. Aren't you happy that you're on a leash and he's behind a fence? Come on, Pippi, leave him alone. I think we're gonna have to pause this really quick. I think that was a Belgian Malinois. I'm completely digressing. Have you guys seen all the videos on those dogs? Those are the most amazing dogs ever. They're usually like they work for, not the police, like they work with the oh my gosh, like the SEALs and the Army Rangers. They can walk on a tightrope. These dogs are crazy. Apparently all I have to do is sweet talk her. That dog was really mean and I was like, it's a good girl. And then she just got all happy and wagged her tail. So, where was I? No longer being chased by Cujo. So, when it comes to your insurance plan, it really is going to dictate whether or not you have coverage for surgery or coverage for GLP-1. What that is going to really be based on is finances. If I look at a cost per capita for the lifetime of a patient, it is significantly more expensive for a patient to remain on a GLP-1 as opposed to undergo bariatric surgery. That's just for all the upfront costs. We also look at, if you look at the downstream cost of patients, whenever they're just doing medical weight loss, they're still going to, many are still going to continue to be treated for high blood pressure, diabetes. We don't see that whenever you've had weight loss surgery. When an insurance company is going and looking at what is the true cost of a benefit to a patient, typically medical weight loss and GLP-1s, theirs are going to be significantly higher. It's not just the initial outlay of the medication itself. Not to mention, surgery is just more effective than GLP-1s. I think that that's some of the reasoning and the rationale behind why some of these insurance companies, they may cover surgery, but they're not going to cover a medication. Simply because they want to, if whatever they're forking out, they want to make sure that it works. Now, do GLP-1s work? With the right group of people, if you have the right outcome that you want. For instance, if you're a patient and you only need to lose 20, 30 pounds, maybe 40 pounds, medication is great. If you need to lose more than 40 pounds, that medication is not going to be the best option for you. Certainly, if you have high blood pressure, diabetes, PCOS, things like that, you will not have significant resolution. You'll have some improvement. Just a 10% body weight loss can give you an improvement in your systolic blood pressure. It can, give you improvement in your fasting glucose. A 10% body weight loss is not going to put your diabetes into remission. So, and the insurance companies know that. It's really incumbent upon you as the person as the policy holder, to know what your insurance will and will not cover. Do I have patients that they have surgery that's covered, medicines aren't? Absolutely. Do I have some patients where meds and surgery are both covered? And do I have some plans where medication is covered, surgery is not? That is a yes too. I also have some patients where nothing is covered. They got terrible insurance. They would have to pay out of pocket for surgery. They're essentially going to be paying out of pocket for their medications. It's really all across the board, what I have seen in my practice. So, question number 2. If I have had weight loss surgery and I need to lose that last 20 pounds, can a GLP-1 help? Absolutely. And that's where I think GLP-1s shine. I think it is with just losing about 20-30 pounds. I also think a GLP-1 really can help patients if they've had surgery. They want to help to maintain that weight loss. I am going to be working with a young lady. We don't have to make a study because we don't have any good long-term studies or really any large studies looking at the long-term efficacy of a mix between surgery and GLP-1s. I had made a couple of, this dog is getting me all twisted around. I've made a couple of videos before where I'd suggested that it would be great if obesity medicine care could be similar to cancer care. At patients are kind of stratified. It's like, are you grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, something like that, similar to how you're ranked if you have a cancer. Then starting off and saying, okay, are you going to be best served with a medication? Are you going to be best served with surgery, or are you going to be best served with surgery and medication? Then the question would be, if you are best served with medication, what is going to be the best medication out there? Because I will tell you, if you are diabetic, I typically do not see as much appetite suppression or as much weight loss whenever I compare that to patients that are not diabetic. I really think it's because GLP-1s by default are working on a receptor that in somebody without diabetes, that receptor works like it should. If you're diabetic, that receptor's not working like it should. So I don't think you get that extra added benefit of significant appetite suppression because right now it's working on a disease pathway. I think that the effects are just much more pronounced in a good way whenever you're not diabetic. It is not uncommon for me to have a patient that comes to see me and they're on 15 milligrams of Mounjaro. That is the highest dose of tirzepatide, which is the strongest GLP-1 that we have out there. They're like, I don't really have any appetite suppression. Yep. I said, are you diabetic? I'm like, yep, that's why. A lot of times I might add in some phentermine and Topamax along with that, or I might add in some Contrave, which is Wellbutrin and naltrexone. I just kind of see, and so sometimes you have to tag team it with some of these patients. Do I think you could benefit from taking a GLP-1 or really any other medicine for that matter, just to get that remaining weight off after you've had weight loss surgery? Absolutely. And one other thing that I've noticed too is if you've had weight loss surgery, particularly if you've had a bypass or a duodenal switch, you are going to be more sensitive to fluctuations in your glucose. I really think that goes back to changes in some of the digestive hormones that are governed by those particular receptors. So I think even more so if you've had a gastric bypass or duodenal switch, if you were to take a GLP-1 and you're not diabetic, you're probably going to have better appetite suppression and maybe better long-term weight maintenance compared to somebody that maybe if they've had a sleeve. I've just seen that in my practice in terms of, has there been a large study that can support that? There really hasn't been a large study. That is something that I'm working on to change for inquiring minds. So is it okay for you to take medicine after surgery to get that last little bit of weight off? Absolutely. And I also think it can help you with some added weight maintenance. And now let's see, I've got two more questions. One, would medications help regulate my sugars after gastric bypass? I seem to have swings of really high blood sugar and really low. If you are having really big swings in your glucose after you've had weight loss surgery, that is 9 times out of 10 secondary to your diet. And what you're experiencing essentially is dumping syndrome. The last question that somebody says is, what would you recommend for treating dumping syndrome? Let's talk a little bit about what dumping syndrome is. Dumping syndrome occurs after you've had surgery on the gut, particularly whenever you connect the stomach directly to the small bowel. That little sphincter's not in place. I will tell you, you can still get that if you have a sleeve. You can still get it if you have a duodenal switch, where the pylorus, that's the little pucker that separates the stomach from the small bowel, when the pylorus is still preserved and still in place. It doesn't matter what surgery you've had. If you've had weight loss surgery, you're going to be at risk for dumping. At least that's what I've seen clinically for my patients. I'm trying to get out of there we go. It's not all weird and shadowy. So what do I recommend for dumping syndrome? What is it? With dumping syndrome, what happens is if you have a lot of glucose, typically it's either going to be a large volume of glucose or it's going to be a little bit higher volume of high glycemic index carbohydrate that gets dumped into the bloodstream whenever you eat. It's like you have an even bigger dump of insulin to help to control that glucose. What ends up happening is you have all the symptoms associated with low blood sugar. So it's like you've had a dump of glucose, then an even bigger dump of insulin. Insulin brings down the glucose. Now what you're having are symptoms of low blood sugar. So let's talk about a little bit about what are some carbs that might be doing this. Does not mean that you've gone out and had cupcakes or a Krispy Kreme. Doesn't mean that. Although it could mean that if you've had cupcakes and a Krispy Kreme. What it could also mean is that you're having a high glycemic index carb like fruit. If you're doing citrus fruit, high glycemic index. If you're doing watermelon, high glycemic index. However, on the flip side, if you're doing like blueberries or blackberries or strawberries, much lower glycemic index, you're not going to have as big of a bump in your glucose. That's a little bit better at staving off dumping syndrome. Are you having sweet tea from Cane's? Probably going to get dumping from that. Are you having sauces like barbecue sauce and that's full of brown sugar? You might get some dumping from that. Let me see, what are some other little hidden culprits? Some of the Asian sauces that are just so delightful, a lot of sugar in those, that could cause dumping syndrome. Sometimes it doesn't necessarily mean that you've had like a big old plop of frosting from a cupcake. It could be something as innocent as you try to have a little brisket and you put some of that amazing barbecue sauce on it. It was the barbecue sauce that did you in. How do you combat against that? So number one, you need to understand what carbs are. You need to limit that intake. If you're not sure, then I really recommend that you start to keep a food log. And I think I just heard a collective sigh whenever I said, I think you guys should keep a food log. I promise you, keeping a food log is not, or the purpose is not, whenever I went to detention when I was in middle school for always being late. My teacher during detention would say, Charlotte, you need to write 50 lines. Why you shouldn't be late. I promise I won't be late again. I promise I won't be late again. That is not the purpose of what a food log is. The purpose of the food log is really to start to see patterns. If you are having episodes of low blood sugar where your heart is racing, you're nauseated, you're lightheaded, you might have some stomach cramping. Sometimes people will get sick to their stomach. Sometimes people have diarrhea. It's usually more upper GI symptoms and some cardiac symptoms like your heart is racing, like I said. I really want to try to see if there's a pattern in certain foods that are triggers. For instance, you can actually do this as a side note for any GI issue that you're having. You're having reflux after you eat, start keeping a food log. That way you can start to see foods that trigger that. Do you have bloating after you eat? Do you have diarrhea after you eat? Usually if you're experiencing some symptom within 30 minutes to an hour and a half after you eat, there's a good chance that there's something in what you just ate or drank. You need to be specific about what it is. Then you can start nailing it down. Maybe it's the sauce on the food that you ate. Maybe it's the bread that you ate. Maybe it's the fat content that you ate. Maybe it's the glucose or even the sugar alcohols, the fake sugar, and what you drank. For instance, I cannot do Splenda. If I do Splenda, I get really bloated. I feel really miserable. So, which is crappy for me because the diet lemonade at Chick-fil-A is amazing. It's sweetened with Splenda. I just feel crappy after I drink their diet lemonade. So I just get the regular lemonade. But my waist doesn't like that. There's that. You know what I mean? That's what the purpose of the food log is. If you are experiencing dumping syndrome or you're having these really big swings in your glucose, particularly after weight loss surgery, what you're really experiencing is dumping syndrome. We need to find the culprit. 9 times out of 10, it is something that we can fix with your diet. I do not want you going out. If you check your blood sugar seems to be a little bit low. Even if you can still have symptoms of dumping and your glucose be within a normal range. I will tell you, if you are a patient that has a history of diabetes, your diabetes went into remission, you can still have some fluctuations in your glucose. You can still be pretty sensitive to those fluctuations and your glucose still be within a normal range. You don't have to have symptoms of low blood sugar and have a glucose of 30. Your glucose could be 60, which is technically normal, and still have symptoms of low blood sugar. You might see dumping syndrome if you've eaten something high in carbohydrate or drank something that's high in carbohydrate, or if you wait too long to eat, or if you skip a meal, probably going to have symptoms of low blood sugar. One of the things that I will recommend to patients is that if you're experiencing this, let's say you're having more symptoms. Sometimes people wake up in the middle of the night because they feel crappy. They're having a drop in their glucose, that's waking them up. Then a lot of times I'll tell people, if you're eating dinner around 5 or 6, now you're not going to bed until like 10 or 11. You've now gone 5, and then you go to sleep. You're now going 6, 7, 8 hours of fasting. Your little body just can't tolerate that. 1 second, little pips. So if that's the case, then what you need to do is before you go to bed, I recommend that those patients, this dog is driving me crazy. Her leash keeps on getting caught up. Sorry, y'all. If you're one of those little patients that's experiencing that, it's waking you up at night or first thing in the morning, I recommend that you do a really high protein snack right before bed. So either it doesn't have to be a whole thing. You can do like half a protein bar. You could even do a cup of Fairlife milk right before bed. That's going to be 13 grams of protein. You could even do no sugar added hot cocoa. I think that's 25 calories. I know it's less than 10 grams of sugar. I think it might only be 3 or 4 grams of sugar. Then you could put in several scoops of unflavored protein powder or the Vital Proteins collagen. Now you're going to have some hot cocoa right before you go to bed. It's high in protein. You can do that. Those are some good options. If you want a little piece of beef jerky before you go to bed, but it's like you only really need about 10-15 grams of protein if you're experiencing that in the middle of the night, or if you wake up in the morning and you're like woozy and you're like, I always feel like I'm having a drop in my glucose right when I wake up. It's because you've been fasting for so long. Now you just need to replenish. Let's say you seem to have those lulls in the middle of the afternoon. That could be because you've either skipped a meal or you've waited too long to eat. Let's say you wake up in the morning and you feel fine, you have your breakfast at 7, and you don't eat lunch till 2. Guess what? You're going to get them gastric shakes. That's what my husband calls it. For instance, he does great during the week. On the weekend, our schedule is off. So he might feel kind of funny. on the weekends, it's because he hasn't really eaten. He might not really eat something for morning for breakfast. He might just have some coffee. Then we're out blowing and going. He might start feeling crappy early in the afternoon, and it's because his glucose is low. It's just because he hasn't had anything to eat. So you know what you need to do? You need to eat. I don't mean eat like a peppermint stick or something like that to get your glucose up. You just need to eat something. You need to have breakfast or lunch or brunch or something. Protein drink. If you need some fast carb, you have to make sure that you add in some protein along with it. Otherwise, within 30-40 minutes, your glucose is going to drop again because you're going to experience dumping syndrome. It's just some food for thought. I'm not a big fan of glucose tabs for patients that have had weight loss surgery, because if you can do a glucose tab or you can have a cupcake, you're going to get the same symptoms. You're going to develop dumping syndrome within another 30 to 40 minutes after you've taken that. You need to do a carbohydrate, certainly with protein, if you're having a big drop in your glucose. Otherwise, that whole process is going to happen all over again. So does that kind of help? So those are my questions for my Q&A potpourri. Stay tuned for part 2.